Hi Donna, another great census. Well done to you and your team. So, what's the point of this census?
Well, where do I start? The census has been running since 1972. It's a vast data collection. Every single school in membership submits data to us. It covers thousands of data points, and it gives us a real insight into what is happening in the sector, and it's data we can rely on that has been in existence for 50 or so years.
Yeah, it's honest data. That's the point. I've noticed that over the years. The people in charge of the census are determined that it should be honest data. Now, does it reflect independent schools in the country generally? Because obviously not every school is a member of the Independent Schools Council. What proportion of independent school pupils in Britain are involved in this census?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's not all independent schools. And in fact, it's only half of independent schools in the country. But we typically cover the larger independent schools. So that equates to around 80% of all the independent pupils in the UK would be covered by our census.
Okay, so people who use your census data as a proxy for describing all independent schools aren't far wrong in the sense that it's the great majority of independent school pupils. Okay,
That's
right. So 2019, what does the census tell you about the health of independent schools? What do the overall pupil numbers, for example, look like?
So we're in good health. So yet again, another year of record pupil numbers in ISC schools. So again, we're now at the highest number since 1972. We have over 536,000 pupils in our schools this year. So a sector in good health.
It's quite surprising in a way because, 2008, with the financial crisis and the following recession, everyone assumed that independent school numbers would go down. So I'm quite encouraged by that.
Yeah.
Now look, obviously the fees are unaffordable for many people. What's happened to our fees in the last year? Are they still rocketing up?
Well, fees do go up year on year, as do most things in the country. Cars get more expensive, houses become more expensive, and yes, our fees have increased as well. But the typical day fees in our school are around 4,800, but that hides a really complex reality. So, 40 of our schools, for example, charge only 2,000 per term, which is more affordable to the average family. And also in the last 10 years or so, there's been a real conscious effort of schools to really control fees. So in the last 10 years, fees have increased on average around 3.9%.
Okay.
In the 10 years prior to that, it was more like 6.6%. So fees can be expensive, but there are lower value options, and they seem to be more in control in the last 10 years.
Yeah, good. But the fee increase is still above inflation. Is it above inflation?
This year, it depends. Well, what inflation are we measuring?
Yeah,
so if we're talking RPI, then yes, above. But if we're looking at wage inflation, it's only marginally above it this year.
So you're saying that fee increases look under control. The average yearly day fee is about 14,300.
Yeah.
But that's still unaffordable to most people in the country. So what happens about them? Do we help people for whom this level of fee is just out of the question?
Of course. So our schools provide a significant sum in fee assistance, and more specifically over 800 million actually is provided in fee assistance to a range of pupils. Now some of that is awarded for excellence, so in the form of scholarships, but a much larger proportion is awarded on a means tested basis.
Yeah.
And a lot of that directed to those most in need. So, and over 6,000 pupils paid no fees at all this year. So the sector is open to the broad sector of society.
Good. And the amount of money that's being spent on bursaries, means tested bursaries, it seems to have been growing year on year for the last actually 20 years, but particularly in the last 10.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So whereas the amount provided in scholarships has remained relatively stagnant in real terms, the amount for means tested scholarships has steadily increased.
Yeah.
And now twice as much fee assistance is provided for means tested as opposed to scholarships.
Okay, so that's been a big change in my lifetime in schools, that the money used to be spent on scholarships, many of which no doubt went to wealthy families because schools were just trying to attract the most intelligent children, and it was a kind of bribe, if you like, a competitive bribe. But now the aim of our schools is to diversify, make the schools accessible to disadvantaged pupils, and they've achieved that by transferring a large chunk of the scholarship money into means-tested bursaries or scholarships. It comes to the same thing very often for other schools.
That's correct.
Yeah. So now tell us a bit about partnerships. You know, we've been talking about partnerships actually for the last 20 years, but in the last 5 years, here at the Independent Schools Council, we've talked a lot about partnerships. We've set up our own Schools Together website to promote them. Is it just a few big schools doing partnerships? What does your census data suggest?
Yeah. So again, partnerships is something we only started collecting information on in the last sort of 4 years or so.
Yeah.
But the numbers of partnerships in existence are, again, vast. So the vast majority of our schools engage in some sort of partnership. So, and of the 1,000 and odd schools that engage in partnerships, collectively, they're working on 11,000 different partnerships with state schools. It's a huge number. Now, the partnerships are really far-ranging. They might be seconding pupils to read with younger pupils. It might be sharing of facilities. It could include preparing pupils, A-level pupils for university entrance, and so on. And the census shows the wide range, and I'd encourage any viewers to look at the full range. But yes, over 11,000 partnerships are in existence at the moment between our schools and neighbouring state schools.
And over the last, the period that you've been collecting data, has partnerships grown, or what are we looking at?
This is a difficult question because we've only started collecting data in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So it has grown, but some of that might be a case of schools taking a little while to report on their partnership.
Okay, so
and also we want to be a bit careful of this sort of growing year on year disproportionate to the numbers of schools, because we want these partnerships to be strong partnerships, streamlined, so the schools are spending the time most efficiently and working on the most beneficial partnerships rather than spreading themselves too thinly. So this year they're up slightly, but we wouldn't expect it to grow significantly, because I think that might not be necessarily a good sign.
And presumably it's quite hard for us to actually measure the impact and the number of pupils involved and all those things.
Yeah.
You try, but it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. It's incredibly difficult, and this is something that's not done very well in any sector, even the charity sector, which are all about impact. But our schools are starting to make their way around that arena. It's like I said, it's not easy because often you're trying to measure soft things. Now we did a small study at ISC quite recently to start to understand the impact of these partnerships, and one of the most interesting findings that came from that is that whilst these partnerships are wide-ranging, I mentioned a few earlier, preparing for Oxford entrance, reading with younger pupils, actually a lot of the aims and the outcomes from these partnerships are to do with soft skills, building confidence, grit and resilience. So schools are starting to look at these measurement tools to understand the partnership they're running and to make sure they're running the most efficient partnerships for everyone involved.
Brilliant. Now, about a third or more of our schools have boarders, so boarding is quite important. Is boarding in terminal decline? I mean, what does your census tell us about boarding?
Yeah. So since the turn of the century, the number of boarding pupils in our schools has been relatively flat.
Okay.
So we have around 70,000 boarders in our schools. Probably the most interesting thing that came out of the census this year is the change in boarding patterns. Now you can have full boarding, weekly boarding, flexi boarding. Now whilst full boarding still remains the most popular, in the last 3 years there's been a shift, and the weekly and flexi boarding has become more popular. So 3 years ago around 16% of all boarders were flexi or weekly, that's now 18%. That might seem like a small shift, but in the scheme of the census, where you just see small movements year on year, that's actually a reasonably significant move. Now, this is quite a popular choice for hard-working parents that value the flexibility of having somewhere for their children to stay on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, but then value their weekends and Friday nights with them. So this will be an interesting trend that we'll watch in future years.
I think it's a really important trend. I mean, I've got quite a lot of nephews and nieces who do flexi boarding, and essentially it's their way into boarding. They start one day a week, maybe every other week, and then gradually the proportion grows as they come to like it. Yeah. Okay. So what about franchise schools? I mean, we've been criticised for setting up franchise schools abroad. How many of them are there now?
Yeah. So we touched on this briefly in the census. It's not a key part, but yes,
No.
it has grown in recent years. There are 58, I believe,
Yeah.
overseas schools set up, educating around 40,000 pupils. And what's interesting is that means there are now more pupils being educated abroad than there are overseas pupils coming to our schools, and that's only recently
Really?
changed.
Yeah. What proportion of our pupils in this country are from overseas?
So it's 5.4%.
Okay.
Now again, that's a statistic that we've been collecting since 1972. So some things are new, like we talked about earlier, like partnerships. But overseas pupils, we've been collecting since way back when. And actually, that percentage hasn't changed an awful lot in that time.
So the thing, I mean, going back to the franchise schools, what people need to remember is that these franchise schools have all been set up, as far as I know, to raise money for bursaries to enable children from disadvantaged backgrounds to come to our schools in the United Kingdom, and that's what they're for. And from that point of view, I hope that the number continues to grow. It's an important trend, isn't it, actually? It's an important trend. Okay, so the other thing that you include in the census is something about academic results, partly because we only get confirmation of academic results at about this time of year. What can you conclude about the academic results of the past year as far as our schools are concerned?
Well, the main time when we collect academic results is in August, and we publish summary statistics for the sector. What we do at census time is that we analyse a data set that the Department for Education released in January. Now, what that data set does, what our data set doesn't do in August, is that it breaks things down by subject.
Ah, right.
So it allows us to look at it a bit more deeply. So before we get into academic results, one of the interesting things that shows, and what we've highlighted in the census this year, is the subjects for which our schools are overrepresented. So a lot of the key subjects like maths and science, and classics, modern foreign languages, music, dance, those sorts of things. Comparatively, state schools tend to be overrepresented in things like English, law, media studies, and general studies. Now these are interesting findings in terms of our disproportionate
influence.
Exactly. In terms of results, so again, it shows that we do outperform the national average quite significantly. Just to give you a few examples here, so at A level, so chemistry. So more than 50% of our pupils are awarded an A or A star, compared to less than 30% nationally. GCSE. Independent school entries account for double the number of 9 to 7 grades for both French and German compared to the national average. IB, so we don't just do A levels. There's a range of exams we do in our school. So IB results, and again we can compare to worldwide averages here. Now nearly 4 times as many pupils proportionally gain the 40 points in the IB compared to the worldwide average. So it just goes to show our academic standing on a global scale, and that's probably why we attract so many of these international pupils to our schools.
Oh, well, that's tremendous. And so, I mean, if you take modern languages, it seems to me as if we're propping up modern languages to some extent, because we've got a high proportion of all the candidates, particularly at A level, and we've got a very high proportion of all the candidates getting top grades at A level, and therefore that would explain why a high proportion of everybody reading modern languages at universities come from our schools. Because numbers and grades. Well, that's great. Donna, thank you very much. I mean, did all the schools in the Independent Schools Council fill in their census forms this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody has to. It's a condition of membership. So every single school has submitted, and it's a full data set, as we talked about earlier.
Well, it's well done to them, and it's well done to you and your team. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.